Hi there, it is Jo from Minerva, and today I'm here to do a fur masterclass, a faux fur masterclass. So if you are thinking about sewing fur, then you might find some top tips in today's video. I'm going to take a look at some different types of fur. So some have a long pile, some have a short pile, some you can cut and it doesn't shed too much. Some are easier to sew than others. There's lots of different nuances and changes you might need to make to your machine and your techniques depending on which fur that you have got to sew. But today I'm going to show you lots of different types of fur, and then maybe you can pick out something that you'd like to go and explore further. I've got some fur samples to show you. So this is Minerva core range. All of these fabrics are core range fabrics. You'll be able to find those on the website and you can order them over a longer period of time. There are other furs there, but they will run out of stock. So I've chosen some Minerva core range ones. This is a short pile fur. If I change the nap, you'll see. So that's going with the nap. That's going against the nap. You can give it a comb when you first get it out of the packet. Because it's synthetic, it doesn't crease or anything. You can't really iron it or steam it. You just got to hang it up when you get it out of your packet. This one is called Silver Fox, and you can see the pile just gives it lots of shadows and highlights. This one would be suitable for jackets and gilets, hoodies. This next one is a long pile fur, and it's got the same backing, but you can see the pile is much longer, so you'll need to use some of the techniques that I'm showing you today, and you need to be really careful when you cut it because you don't want to cut all of that off or you'll end up with bald seams. This makes really dramatic coats or cosplay items, or really nice a trim on something, so if you want to make a fur collar. This one is a long pile. These next ones are Sherpa fleeces, so they're a much tighter fur texture. So the pile is much shorter and denser, so you won't need to do any trimming out here. You just need to sew it together. If you do get an area where the pile is just sort of nipped in the seam, you can flick it out. This is a cotton fabric. It's got the plain backing on the back, and it's fabulous for children's wear, so really good for little coats with a furry collar, adult gilets. You can back this with a lining, so you could use maybe a really nice sort of Liberty lining on the inside, and you can bind it. You can use a bias binding to go all the way around the edge of a gilet, and you'll get a really cosy outerwear garment that you can layer up with other items. You can see as it moves, the pile opens up, but it's not as loose as the long or short pile. If you want to look for this kind of fabric, then you need to use the word Sherpa. The second Sherpa fabric I've got to show you is beautiful. It's called Lambskin, and it's so soft. It's much loftier than the last one because it's a synthetic fabric. So this one is 100% polyester, and the backing is a smooth finish, but it's got a little bit more give, lots more stretch and movement. So that's the straight grain. The cross grain is really quite stretchy, and it's really light and lofty, so although it feels thick, it's not heavy at all. So this one would be perfect for little baby wear, children's wear, or if you're adding a fur detail and you don't want to add lots and lots of weight to a fabric that's already quite thick, for example like a denim or a cord or a drill or twill, and you're putting a collar on. So this one is a lamb's Sherpa. Oh, it's so lovely. And of course you don't have to choose natural colour fabrics with fur. You can choose different colours. The short pile fur comes in lots of different colours, and this Sherpa is in a beautiful dusty pink. I wish you could feel it, it's so nice. These next couple of fabrics are in the fur category on our website, but they're much shorter in pile. They're sort of akin to a thick velvet, but with that sort of fur texture. So this is called Velboa. So the sort of word vel is in there, which reminds me of velvet. It's like a really thick velvet and imitates fur. It's much easier to sew. You don't need so many of the techniques that I'm showing you today. You can just cut and sew this. You can use it to make suits. You can make mini skirts out of it. You can make jackets, gilets. You can use it to trim. You can use this combined with another fabric because it's quite compatible with other fabrics. So you could mix this with coating. They're about the same weight. This one's got a beautiful texture that shines and moves the light around when you move the fabric. So if you've not heard of Velboa before, go and check that one out. If you're liking the look of Velboa and you think that might be something that's easier for you to sew, and it certainly is, then check out the Minerva core range selection of animal prints. Now, I don't often wear animal prints, but if you really like an animal print style, there are over 20 different animal prints there. So there's some slightly more unusual ones. I've chosen a little sample of the giraffe one to show you, and you can see it here made up in a waistcoat, and it looks really fantastic, really classic with a white shirt and trousers. But you can also sew Velboa into costumes and dresses and different outfits. So there's a cow print in this fabric as well. So this is a superb dress, isn't this amazing? Something really different. It makes a great costume or outfit if you want to feel comfortable and feel like you're still well dressed. These ones are polyester, and there's still a nap on them, so you'll still need to find that when you're cutting out. But take a look at these. There's much smaller prints in this, so there's little cheetah ones. There's big prints like these ones. The cow print's quite large. So take a look at the Minerva animal print in a Velboa, and you're sure to find something to satisfy your animal print craving. First of all, we're going to take a look at what happens when we unpack our fur, what happens when we cut it, how we're going to cut it, taking a look at the nap and maybe making sure that all the fibres are going in the right direction and they're not getting caught in the fabric at all during cutting or indeed sewing. I've been cutting out a gilet in my faux fur fabric, and I thought I'd give you a few cutting tips. So what you will see straight away is when you're cutting, you'll get lots of shedding. So if you've got children around who might put it in their mouths, you might want to do it at a different time of day. It's best to cut fur in a single layer from the reverse. So I'm going to cut my fabric from the back, but I need to check that nap. So that's running down, that's running up. So the nap is going that way. And because I don't want to confuse myself while I'm cutting, I'm going to draw that on so that if I'm turning this around or I'm trying to fit pieces on, I don't get confused. So that way the nap is running down. So I need that going from shoulder to hem. I'm cutting out butterick 6328. I need to observe the grain line because I've got a nap, and I'm going to pin my pattern in place. It's hard to do this if you've only got weights. Pins just hold it down nice and accurately. And you will see if I just cut faux fur, so let me just cut a little bit off here. That's when the shedding will occur because you're cutting through the pile and you don't want to have bald patches on the edges. So it's best to cut with a knife if you can. So this will slow down your whole cutting out process. It does take quite a long time to carefully cut out fur. You'll need a craft knife. I've just got a DIY craft knife and a brand new blade. So I've snapped one off. I've got a new blade, and it's a good idea to have a little practice on a test piece so you know how much pressure you're going to apply. And even if you don't cut it all the way through, you can peel the fibres apart, and that way you don't lose so much of your fur fabric from the edges. You might also want to test it in the other grain I definitely don't need to put as much pressure in the straight grain as I do in the cross grain. So I've got a little bit of knowledge there now to take forward to the actual cutting out of my garment. So here I'm going to go quite lightly, and I'm trying to only go through the backing and not really cut through to the fur. The thicker the pile, the easier it is to do, but the more careful you have to be. If you're cutting Valboa, then you can cut that with scissors because the pile isn't so thick, and the same for Sherpa fabric. So when you cut your edge, if you're a perfectionist, you might struggle with this because you'll feel like you're not cutting neat enough, but you just need to be getting the backing close to the edge of your paper, because of course your seam line is going to be further in anyway. You should be having this fur hanging over the edge of your paper. If you're cutting it off flush, then you'll get lots and lots of shedding. This one's not so bad, look, because we haven't cut so many. You don't want to be cutting the edge of your fabric off. So continue in that way, which is why it takes such a long time to cut out fur, because you're trying to make sure that you've still got that furry edge. If you're finding by doing the pulling that you're ripping the paper, you can always use a chalk pencil to mark off your shape, take off the paper, and then your fur is much more handleable. It's easier to move and manipulate and to turn around in different directions. So now I can take that off, and then I can really handle with my knife and my hands to manipulate going around a curve like the armhole. If you're cutting straight lines, you're on the straight grain. So for example, you're making a cushion cover and you've got a really square piece, no curves or anything, you can score the back of the fabric and tear it, and that will eliminate cutting off the pile on the edge. So on straight pieces, you can tear the backing, but again, I would try it on a spare piece first. You might find you can't tear it going across the grain, so you have to keep testing all the time. You need to be cutting your pieces in a single layer, so even if you need two fronts, a left front and a right front, you need to cut another one. Now, if you do, you need to remember to flip your piece so that you definitely get two opposite pieces. For pieces that need to be cut on the fold, you still need to be cutting in a single layer. So mark the centre back and the centre back of the waist. Draw around your pattern piece, flip, and then draw around it again so that you can repeat that cutting procedure, but you're just cutting out in a single layer. If you're finding that the craft knife isn't getting a cut edge like you want, you can use a really small pair of scissors. So these are out of my scissors set, and you can take tiny little cuts, and you're really trying to get your blade in between all the hairs on the wrong side. You have to lift it up a little bit and mark your fabric, but you can see there I'm still getting the hairy edge. I haven't cut all of those off. So that's an alternative if you're finding that the craft knife either isn't going through your backing or you're not getting very good cut with it. It's not very accurate, or it's just not working for you. You can just snip the backing with tiny snips. If you're cutting lining for a fur jacket, then there's a few places that you can just take your lining down a tiny little bit, and that allows for the turn of cloth. So when your fur is turned around, the lining will definitely pull round to the inside. It needs to be the places that are on the outer edge. So this is the front edge, so I'm going to take a tiny little skim off that lining. So when I sew the seam allowance here, the jacket will be a little bit shorter on the front inside lining, and that will pull it inside. You don't want lots of layers and facings with fur, because then you've got more and more joins. This gilet is sleeveless, so I don't want the lining to pull out on the sleeves. I'm going to take a tiny slither off there. And along the hem, I want the hem to have the lining rolled to the inside. So it's a little bit like what you do when you make an undercollar, and you make your undercollar slightly smaller than your upper collar so that you roll the seam to the wrong side. You can't do lots because then your pieces won't fit together. You just need to take some thin slivers off to enable the two pieces to still fit together, but roll the lining to the inside. When you're putting your fur pieces together temporarily, it's probably best to use something like a quilter's pin. A pin here that's got a really big head so you can see it, because if you've got a long pile, again, it'll get lost in the fibres, and when you're sewing you don't want to damage your needle in your machine by hitting any pins. I've got some quite big head pins that I use for when I'm sewing thicker fabrics and fur, but if you use anything with a small glass head, it will just get lost in the fibres. You can also use clips. They're really good because clips don't weigh down the weight of the fabric. I don't like to use clips with a light fabric because my fabric also seems to be falling all over the place and the weight of them drags the garment around. But with fur, it's really firm fabric, so when you put a clip on, you can still sew it and have really good accuracy. Let's take a look at the machine setup for fur, so we can try a few of those different types and see how we need to set up our stitch length and width and which stitch selection to use. Let's start with a short pile first. So you can see we've still got that furry edge on the edge of our cut. And you're going to sew with a slightly longer stitch length. And when you open it up, you shouldn't really be able to see where the seam line is. The fur should be able to blend in. If you are getting some of this fur tucking into the seam, then you can just use a darning needle or a knitting needle to hook some of the fur out of the seam. It means you can really blend them together. It's more important to do this on a longer pile fur. I'll show you a longer pile fur next, but I can feel I'm releasing those sort of hairy bits out of the seam and to the right side of the jacket. You find with any fabric that's got a deep pile, and fur in particular, and the Velboa fur, you might get a lot of creeping. So that's where the one layer of fabric being fed through on the feed dogs is going through at a different rate. So you might find a walking foot is a really good addition to have if you're sewing any kind of piled fabric that includes velvet, cord or faux fur. I'm going to put that on now to sew the rest of my gilet together. Done my sample, and I was getting a little bit of creeping. These two pieces of fur are exactly the same length, so let's see if the walking foot means that when we get to the end they are still the same length. Same and the same. And if you are getting too much bulk, as well as just trimming off the fur from the backing, you can layer out the whole seam. You need to do that after you've pulled through the pile, because you need the long lengths from that seam allowance to come through onto the right side. And then when you're happy that you've got all of the hairs through that you want, all of the fur through that you want, then you can layer out and reduce the seam allowance. You need to make sure that when you put your pieces together, you've got both naps going in the right direction, so they're both going in the same direction. And on the reverse, you'll have quite large seams, they'll be quite bulky. If you have quite a big pile and you want to take some of that out, you can then trim off anything here that's excess. This will reduce bulk. If you're lining your garment, you might want to just do that at the top of your seams where the next seam joins on. So say here, if I've got a line, say that's the underarm, I'm going to take some of that pile out. If your item is not lined, then you can overlock the edges, and that will just keep everything neat and tidy on the inside. If maybe when you open your jacket you'll just be able to see inside. Black would have been better there, but I had it on quite a big diff on diff feed 2, stitch length 3 and stitch width 5.5, and it's gone through fine, and it hasn't affected any of my seam on the right side. If you want some hand sewing and you think you'll prefer to do that than trying to get all fluffy bits stuck in your machine, then a hand sewing technique that you would join the two pieces of fur with is a blanket stitch. So you put the fabric right sides together and you take your needle through the 2 layers from front to back, and then put the working thread behind the needle. You have a nice ridge here along the top of your seam line, but it just lets the pile of the fabric be released a little more easily. This is a good technique if you've got a long pile fur and you're making something small like a stole or a scarf. So if you want to hand sew something together, use a blanket stitch. As a final check, when you've nearly finished your garment, you can just go around and check the seams to see if any of your fur is still clamped down within the seam. So just there, I can see that all of that needs flicking out. So I can just get my darning needle underneath and flick out the pile. That way I don't get this edge of lining showing. I can flick all of that out and get a furry pile edge. There you go. You can do the same around the armhole. So if any of this is available to be pulled through, look, you'll get a much fluffier edge. It just really enhances the overall furry look of the jacket. To sew long pile fabrics, you're going to use all the same techniques. So put your fabric right sides together, but you want to try and get as much of that pile towards the right side as you can. You can comb it, that helps to keep it going in the right direction, and then you can put your pieces right sides together. And always test a sample first, but I'm going to use a stitch length 4 because the pile is quite long, so I want to be able to pull that through to the right side. Let's sew. If you can change the pressure of your foot, you might want to loosen that off to allow for the thicker fabric between the foot and the feed dogs. And we can see the seam here because some of those pieces of fur are pointing in, and you use the same technique as you did before to pull the fur out from the seam. You sort of give it a little hairstyle. A few little bits will shed off because they might have been ones that were just on the very edge of the fabric. When you've pulled them through and you comb the long pile, you shouldn't really be able to see where the seam is. It's just all hairy all over. You don't want bald patches in here, and you don't want any of the pile sort of crimped down and caught in the seam. You can finger press open the seam on the back. You can add binding if you're going to see it, or your item will probably be lined. You don't really put buttonholes on a fur because you'll get all the pile all squidged down in funny places. So you tend to use a fur hook and eye. It's a really exaggerated large hook and eye that's bound with a cord, and that makes it really smooth so it doesn't catch on any of the hairs or anything. Because it's so big, you really want to put them on properly. So if you need a few tips on how to put on a hook and eye, you can check it out in my video here. The key to this is to not have too much of your hook and eye showing. So you want your hook and eye to be well into your fabric, and if you've got a lining, it's much easier because you can have something to attach it to. You can bury the knot within the hairs of the fur and sew in place with lots of small stitches. If you want it to be really secure, you can put your needle through the loop of thread and have your thread double. That way it will be more secure. It's a little bit more fiddly because the threads come through at different rates, so you need to pull those working threads nice and slowly. Once you've done one half, tunnel through fabric to the other side and repeat the process. Once you've done both sides, you want to avoid this hook from flipping and hinging backwards and forwards. So again, tunnel through to this point here where the two parts of the hook and eye narrow to meet each other, and put a few stitches to hold that down so that it doesn't rock backwards and forwards. So it's joined here, here and here as well, and that way your hook is just coming past the edge of the fur edge, but it's not able to flip back. You can knot that off now and repeat for the other side. You really want to avoid having a big gap between the two parts of the hook and eye, so make sure they're nice and close. You can, if you want a really couture finish, you can put the hook and eye on the fur before you line it, so that all you've got sticking out is the edge of the hook and eye, and all of this eye bit here is concealed inside. But this is just one hook and eye to hold the top of my gilet, so it swings from the bottom, so I'm happy with it to be on the inside. Fur hooks and eyes come in different colours. I've chosen a grey to work in with my fur, but there's black ones, white ones, they're all on the website, and I've listed those below. When you've finished any fur project, it's always a good idea to clean out your machine. You'll get lots of fluffy bits of lint in the bottom, so take out the foot plate, give it a good brush around, and take all the little bits out, and then reset everything. You've got lots of knowledge now. What would you sew with fur? So if you fancied choosing some to have a sew with, then what sort of things what could you make? Well, you could start with some homeware, because that's really easy, because you'll be cutting things mostly in a rectangular shape, so you won't have too many problems cutting on a curve or anything. So you could try some cushions or a throw. If you back them, then you don't see that synthetic backing, and you can just sew the straight lines, and you can really practice just flicking out those fur fibres so that you get a hairy edge, not just an edge that's got all the fibres crimped down. You can use fur fabrics for toy making, of course. So here's a pattern for a toy. You can use different fabrics for this pattern, which is why I chose it. So you can use woven fabrics, you can use matte fabrics, or you can use a piled fabric like a fur, and you'll get a really different feel to your toy. Talking of children, some of the Sherpa ones, the ones that have got a sort of nubby texture, a sort of animal nubby texture like a sheep, they make great gilets. So this is a superb gilet pattern. I have made this one before. It was so cute. It's quite thick, the layers, so you might need a binding technique to hold some of the layers down around the hood edge, but it's good for boys and girls, this pattern. So although it started with a girl, that gilet is perfect for boys or girls. If you really want to go for the full fur coat sort of style, then this pattern is great. It's made for using fur fabric, so there's a few more tips in the pattern instructions. If you want to use some of the Sherpa fur for a gilet, that's great for boys wear and men's wear. So you'll get that sort of thick, warm feeling gilet. And you can use just the Sherpa for a collar or the inside of something. So you could make the outside of a gilet in one colour and put the Sherpa on the inside. You can use fur in cosplay and costume making. So you might want to make a sort of big hairy gilet, or use fur as a trim on something, maybe around a hood, or something sort of, Robin Hood style, where you're making costumes where you might make part of the outfit in fur and the rest of the outfit in a different fabric. You can use a finer Velboa fur, which is much more velvety, and the pile is a lot shorter, but you can use that as a base for kids costumes, where you make a onesie and then you add all the features, the ears, the tail, the paws, and all of those kinds of things. The Velboa in our Minerva range that has the full range of animal prints is really interesting, because it's just a little bit more than a leopard print. There's giraffe, there's cow, there's zebra, there's lots and lots of different prints there, so that might really help you to explore a onesie costume for a child a little bit more. But this pattern would be the base for that, and then you could go and choose a different fur to get a different look. If you don't think you want to make a full garment in fur, you can use it really successfully for accessories. So you can use it to make a hat. This is a really nice pattern for a hat. You get a really sort of vintage cozy feel of a winter hat, you can add details onto that as well. You can use it to make for bag making, so you can definitely use it on the outer of a bag. You might want something on the bottom of your bag different, like a faux leather, so that when you put your bag down on the floor it doesn't get damaged on the bottom. But the bags that have a sort of bucket bit around the bottom that's faux leather, and then you can put the fur on the top and the lining inside, they do look really quite sophisticated. If you're looking to make a smaller garment, then maybe a stole or a little piece of evening wear might be a good place to start. They're not complicated shapes. You're not putting lots of construction of one piece into another piece. You can move that stole up to the next level if you're getting a little bit more confident sewing fur, and you can use it to make like short, small evening jackets. I've got a fur evening jacket, and every time I wear it, people ask me what pattern it is, and I bought it. So I think on my radar will be to make my own fur jacket, so that I can maybe get a different colour, which means I can use more of my evening wear with a colour jacket that matches more things. Of course, if you're a more experienced sewer, then you might want to take your fur fabric into a full coat. So a couple of coat patterns that I've picked out. You can try a casual bomber jacket. So bomber jackets are great because you really can choose so many different fabrics as that base fabric. You're going to have to be really careful when you put the ribbing on here that you don't fold the fur pile under, but it really does depend which fur you pick. If you pick a Velboa, you won't have any problems there at all, not around the cuffs or around the zip insertion. If you want to make a winter coat, a full length long coat, there's a lovely example on our website. The pattern is here. It's a long one with quite a big collar, so you can really get all of that nice fur around your neck. The Polish sewer's made such a beautiful coat with that, and she's combined two different furs, so she's got a Velboa on the inside and a long pile on the outside, and it really is super luxurious. If you don't think you can manage a full fur sew along of anything, then you could try some of our Minerva core range fur trim. So if you've made a coat and it's looking really good and you want to add an element of fur, you can use it around the hem and the cuff like here. It really takes your coat to a sort of winter wonderland level. You can use the white for trimming things like Santa Claus costumes, or for putting around the top of a Christmas stocking. The fur trim is quite easy to attach. You can just sew that on by hand, and when you fluff it up you won't see any of your stitching. It's a little bit easier to sew than a full fur garment. Well, I hope that's given you a bag full of inspiration. I hope I've shown you some different types of fur fabrics, some uses for using faux fur, and some patterns that you can go and search out. I've listed the patterns below so that you can easily go and find them, because obviously we've got thousands of patterns and it's hard to sort of pick them out. So hopefully I've done that little bit of legwork for you. We would love to see if you have been making anything in fur, or whatever your current project is at the moment. So do make a free account, share your makes, add a little picture and a description, and show us what you have been up to. It really does inspire us and our Minerva community. You can also head over there and join the craft club, where you will receive discounts and offers throughout the year. If you'd like to see another masterclass, or as a particular type of fabric that you'd like a few top tips on, then you can leave that in the comments below. If you want some other sewing content, you can head to our Minerva YouTube channel, or you can go to our Minerva feed and check out sew-alongs, learn to sew videos, new pattern releases, new fabric print releases. There's lots and lots of sewing inspiration for you to help you choose your next project. Thank you very much. Do call again soon.